Hi, Han. Hi, Rick.
Hi,
Oh, I just turned on my video. There we go. Hello.
floor is yours, Rick.
Perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, all. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Rick ten Holder. I am a consultant at HVFC, a global fundraising consultancy helping organizations like yours diversify and grow their funding. I will be your host today. This webinar is done in partnership with the Hague Humanity Hub. HVFC and the Hague Humanity Hub partner to bring you expert knowledge and sessions about access to funding, such as the session today. If you want to know more about our activities, we can send you more information after the webinar. The goal of the Funders Focus series, as we call it, is to share knowledge, insights, and a bit of perspective. Something that's more critical than ever in today's environment. But before we begin, a few practical notes. Know that this webinar is being recorded and we'll share the recording afterward. However, the Q&A session will not be recorded, just to encourage open discussion. We have over 350 registered attendees, so we'll keep everyone muted. The first 45 minutes will be a presentation of the newly published policy by the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Development Aid, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. If you have questions about the policy or if you want to report a technical issue, please use the chat function. We have a chat moderator today, Carla Espinosa, and she will collect the questions for the Q&A. We will try to answer every question, but if we don't get to yours today, we will try to follow up online or one-on-one. Finally, feel free to introduce yourself and the organization you're working for in the chat. It's a great way to connect with the others attending. Now, today's speaker is Han Valk. He's the founder and CEO of HVFC. With over 20 years in fundraising, leading teams at 3 INGOs and working with the Ministry of Foreign Trade and Development Aid, Han specializes in helping organizations diversify funding and develop strategies to close financial gaps. Han, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rick, and welcome everyone to this webinar, which we decided to schedule last week. Bit in a rush, but we saw that there is quite a lot of interest in the topic, so a need to discuss the current developments after the policy letter that has been shared by the ministry last week. So the purpose of today, there are a few steps. So first, I want to give you an overview of what the policy letter is all about. I'm going to share our thoughts on the expected next slides. And of course, like Rick was saying at the end, there is room for question and answers. And that's step number 4, not obligated, of course, but if there's anything that is not being discussed today or that is really specific to your organization, please reach out to us, and we're here to try to answer the questions that you might have. Good. So the policy letter itself, on the picture you see the Minister for Foreign Trade and Development Aid, we nowadays have to say. Took her a little bit of time, but last week on February 20, finally the policy letter, her vision on the future of development aid was being published. And this is about 3 weeks after there was a debate in the parliament about the expected cuts and the vision that the minister has on development aid and the role civil society plays in this. And in this debate, she explained her reasoning for focusing less on civil society, so focusing less on funding civil society, I have to say, focusing less on working with consortia, larger consortia, working less with INGOs, but work more, as she says, with direct awarding, work more with governments, with certain countries. And she brought in the idea to make organizations rely less on the ministry. So 50% of the funding that you can apply for, 50% of your budget can be applied for with the ministry and no longer more. And this means that for a lot of organizations, problems are created. Well, in the policy letter, and we go into the details in a bit, and nothing on this has been changed so much. The debate that was there was a continuation of a letter and the budget that was presented to the Parliament last year in November. You might have seen it. And there are differences to the budget that was presented to Parliament in November to today. So that we are going to zoom into today, so you see the differences between November and today. And I think most important for many of you is the role of civil society in this, and well, the role of civil society is definitely not growing. It's actually decreasing a bit, but we come into to that. And that in combination with another statement that the minister has made, that when she talks about funding civil societies, she says that's only 30% of all the funding that will actually go to civil society. But the first 30% I've labeled already. Well, that's now less the amount. So if that is indeed going to stay 30%, that means that the total budget for civil society organizations is also going to be less. But let's explore a bit what she said. So first of all, the massive budget cuts. This is no news, but yeah, maybe good to start there. The pink or the salmon color is the new presented budget by the minister. The blue was the original anticipated budget. And that was a budget where 0.62% of ODA of GDP was official development assistance funding. So there used to be a connection between the GDP, the gross national domestic product, so the income of a country, and what is being spent on development cooperation, the development aid we now have to call it. That connection is let go, and the total budget has been cut. So you see between the anticipated budget and the new budget, a decrease of about 2.4 billion in the coming years. And there will be a structural cut. From there on, of course, we have to see what happens, but because there's no longer a connection between the official development assistance budget and the gross national domestic product of a country, you can imagine that the gap will grow over the years after this as well. There's one slightly positive thing that made the cut a little bit less, and that's the connection of how much money for the shelter of refugees in the Netherlands, the first year shelter of refugees in the Netherlands, that is now put at a gap, ceiling of 10%. So even if the costs are higher than 10%, no more than 10% can be taken from this budget, and that's the only positive thing I think in this budget. So though you hear the minister now saying that the budget is more or less going to stay the same, well, in absolute numbers, she might be right if you take a 5-year horizon from now. But if you look at what it should be like, it's a massive budget cut, and we will definitely see the effect of this. Also, what is new is, this is something inspired, I think, from what is happening on the other side of the ocean, and maybe a trend that has started in the Netherlands also a while ago. Also in the previous government, we saw that happening, is the principle of the Netherlands first. And it means that development aid budget should benefit the Dutch as much as possible. So everything that is happening now is being tied to economic security or migration interest. So that is definitely new here. more on trade, well, you see the topics here, migration, less on traditional development aid. So the Dutch government is not the first one in this that is taking this step, but is definitely going to have a huge effect. You see that already in the focus areas, and I will go through them one by one. So to explain to you the differences in each sector, we see that 3 sectors are being highlighted as priority areas. So more funding will go to water management, food security, and health, global health. And less or maybe 0 will go to the other 5 topics that you see: women's rights, gender equality, vocational and higher education, sports, culture, climate, and civil society. And that's where you will see the effect probably. No, this is something that is going to affect many of the organizations present today, and of course also the beneficiaries of their work, and which is of course very how to say that politely, concerning, alarming. Good. If we focus on the geographic focus, also there is more focus, and you see more focus on West Africa, Horn of Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. Minister would like to phase out in the other countries unless there are possibilities to the business there. And business can be direct business, can also be migration business. So if it doesn't say that explicitly in the letter, but what you can expect if a government is offering shelter to refugees or is going to make sure that refugees can no longer come to Europe, they might be compensated for that, so they can make money out of that using the ODA budget, the development aid budget that is there. The programmatic work will focus mainly on these regions, and that means that a lot of countries where we're currently active are going to be phased out. And phased out is a very nice word of explaining that they will be left empty-handed. Few key priorities, I already mentioned them briefly, but a lot is going to be focusing on trade and economy, security, stability, and migration. Trade and economy, that can be happening in well, anywhere where the Dutch will benefit from it, and there are a few examples later. Security, stability, and migration, mainly in the neighboring countries that we have in Europe. Good. As promised, I am going to zoom into the focus areas and just explain the differences and the new priorities there. So, water management, top priority, and you see on the left a summary, and I will go through that one by one. On the right, you see that in every slide you see the budget. Maybe to explain that with the first one a bit more in detail. The blue bars that you see, that's the original budget, the previous budget if it would have continued. The salmon one, the middle one, that is the budget that was presented by the minister in November. So yeah, that's the original budget of this minister. And then the black one, dark gray, whatever you call it, that is the budget that is now in the policy letter. And you see with water management that actually there is more budget allocated to this priority than anticipated in November. So everyone that is into water management is probably relieved. And it's also more than the anticipated budget that we had before. What do we see is that within water management, there is a focus on applying what the Dutch expertise, as it's being called, and it is just to be proud of what we are good at, the Dutch, and export that as much as we can. So you can imagine building dikes or water management in certain countries, creating clean water systems, those types of things you can expect there. Water diplomacy will be used there, and that's mainly the knowledge that we're going to export to other countries, in which we believe, the Dutch believe, if we talk about we, the Dutch believe that will do good to the Netherlands. So it will generate business or create other advantages. There will be a focus on attracting private financing, so getting funding from other sources of funders, where the funding of the Dutch government can be used as a leverage to de-risk, for example, other investors, or get other investors on board. So the assumption is that the funding from the government is going to attract private funding and accelerate the results there. And of course, increase the disaster preparedness that you see there. So to make sure that countries are being assisted in prevention against flooding, drought, these types of activities. And also there it's being mentioned that this is a skill set that the Dutch have for a very long time, knowledge, but also companies. So the idea is, of course, that certain countries are going to hire Dutch companies to help them with the disaster preparedness. If you look into the letter and see what is the role of civil society in all of this, because I think that most of the people participating today are mainly interested in that. Civil society, the explicit role of civil society is not mentioned here. So he does talk about the Dutch water sector, companies, organizations, and financial institutions, but civil society organizations are not mentioned explicitly here. Doesn't mean there are no opportunities for CSOs or NGOs, but they're not mentioned explicitly. So I wouldn't have my hope too high here. However, CSO could fit in the category organization. Any organization fits into that category, of course. So let's see what it means, but personally, I'm not too optimistic there. The second priority that is being mentioned is food security. And also here you see, if you look at the budget, that the new budget, the budget of last week, is higher than the budget that was presented in November. And it's also higher than the original budget. So over the years, so in 2029 it's higher, in the first year it's slightly lower. So this in itself shows that since November, at least budget-wise, this has been given more priority. Here you see a few focus areas within the whole large topic of food security. One is the boosting of local food production. And also here it is about getting people access to local food markets, focus on malnutrition, healthy foods, all of these things, just to make sure that if production goes up, market goes up, but also it creates economic development and stability. Those are the main reasons for focusing on this. In this area, the minister would like to focus to partner with two organizations. They have been mentioned explicitly, so UNICEF and GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Others have not been mentioned in that in the letter. She would like to link the investments to broader programs, and that is mainly to promote the visibility of the Dutch. So you can imagine that money will be used to co-fund activities of the World Bank, African Development Bank, and to make sure that the Dutch position in that, the stake of the Dutch, and grows, and therefore we can get something in return. So that's that. Last focus area is the improving of the land rights, and there's a whole cluster of activities mentioned under land rights. I'm not personally a land rights specialist, but I was a bit surprised by the examples that were giving. They will focus on clarifying land rights, as has been mentioned, improving seed policy, and implementing national food strategies. Not 100% sure why that is being summarized under the word land rights, but land rights is definitely one of the focus areas in this category. But also here you can imagine that our role, the Dutch role, the Netherlands role, is on seed, is on improving food strategies, and well, also on clarifying land rights. So you can imagine that the Dutch cadastre, which is being exported to many countries, and those types of activities will probably be found interesting. If we look at the partners that are being mentioned here, we see that the example of what is being called the Dutch diamond approach, so a PPP kind of approach, collaboration between business, knowledge institutions, civil society, and governments. So all these organizations work together, is being promoted, and the development organizations and the multilaterals are being mentioned. And the Ministry of Agriculture, LVVN, we now have to call it, but you could say the Ministry of Agriculture, has been mentioned explicitly as a partner in the land rights topic. For the rest, the role of civil society is not made very explicit. So what can we expect here is, well, at least a role of civil society in these PPP kind of programs, public-private partnership programs. But for the rest, it's not mentioned explicitly. So also here, my hopes are not too high. The third priority sector that is being mentioned is the health sector. And in that, two focus areas, and compared to the original budget, it doesn't get a lot of extra priority, and compared to the previous budget, it's more or less the same. So it hasn't changed a lot since November. Yeah, so two topics: better healthcare for women and girls, focusing on high quality healthcare services for women, girls, vulnerable groups. Those types of examples are mentioned, bringing healthcare to people in remote areas, well, sexual reproductive health is being mentioned, but yeah, not very explicit, if you ask me. Last focus area is the basic healthcare in southern countries. Here, the role of civil society organization is being mentioned explicitly, so here we can expect most opportunities. So in a letter, it's being stated that the minister wants to work with civil society organizations, international partners, whoever that may be, and the Dutch healthcare companies. And also here, you can expect that the machinery of Philips, of the X-ray machines that the Dutch have developed, and all of these things, I can imagine that those types of exporting of those types of machinery and skill sets, like how do you organize healthcare, those types of activities will definitely be funded. The role of civil society and how much funding there is, we have to see. But compared to the other two, at least the role is being mentioned explicitly as a possible partner in achieving all of this. last priority sector is the humanitarian aid sector. You see that the anticipated budget, the new budget, is lower than the original budget, but it's slightly higher than the budget that was presented in November. And in this, there are two focus areas. So support of humanitarian organizations in general, so they can do their work in times of need, and keep humanitarian personnel safe. And it's mainly here that the example is being mentioned that we will, and with we, I mean the Dutch, are going to promote a Dutch-sponsored UN Security Council resolution on safety and security of UN and humanitarian personnel. So this is something that we, the Dutch, have started earlier, and we are going to continue harvesting from that. If we focus on the support for the humanitarian organizations, because that's where the funding opportunities might be on the longer term, three possible partners are being mentioned. So the UN in general, the Red Cross movement, and the Dutch Relief Alliance. Apart from this, there's no mention of possible support of other NGOs and or civil society organizations. So yeah, this is where it's different with the other three sectors that we just focused on, because their civil society in general was being mentioned every now and then. But yeah, the exact policy on the humanitarian aid will be shared later this year in an annual letter to the Parliament. So the policy on humanitarian aid and diplomacy, as they call it, will be shared later. No date has been given, but at least this year. So then we know more about the details. Good. This is what are these are the sectors that are where budget is still being allocated. Zooming in on the other budgets, there or the other thematic areas, the minister didn't explicitly mention what he still wants to do with those, but what we do have is the budget. So we can anticipate a bit what is expected here. So with regards to climate, a bit of the work of climate is still going to continue, but a lot less. And climate, especially in combination with making business, that mentioned has been made explicit. Plus, also, it should not do harm to the climate work should not do harm to business. So that is also one of the priorities of the Dutch government. So we have to see what will still be left in our climate efforts worldwide. Budget-wise, ODA budget-wise, we see that it will be cut in half. So a lot of funding is disappearing compared to what was announced in November. So the last 3 months, almost half of the budget disappeared, and compared to the original budget, it's even more. So this is quite a drastic cut. Compared to women's rights and gender, well, this sector is being cut even more. As you see in the original indicative budget that was presented in November, there was already quite a cut expected, but it's pretty much brought back to zero. So there's a little bit left in 26 and 27, and those are existing contracts that will be ended, phased out, but no new work on women's rights and gender will be funded afterwards. So this is devastating to the sector. And also no explanation given. Focusing on the civil society, this is the budget line that is there to fund the new Power of Voices kind of program. And we already know that there is less room for, or no room for advocacy anymore in the new policy of the minister. But compared to the budget in November, the total budget that is available for civil society organizations is going down dramatically. As you see, it was almost double in 2029, 2030, what was presented in November only, compared to what is being presented today. So the budget that was presented to the parliament was almost double to the new policy. And that means that the funding that will be available later this year for civil society organizations as a successor of the Power of Voices or the strategic partnerships, as some still call it, is going to be a lot less. So that's not too hopeful. Last sector that is being mentioned is the education sector, and also there, I mentioned it already at the beginning, that will be discontinued. So although the minister announced already huge cuts in November, she decided last week that she announced at least last week that the budget will go down to 0. So no more funding for vocational training and higher education, those types of activities are no longer going to be funded by the Dutch government. That's all about the sectors. Zooming in on how the minister wants to work, few interesting things she mentioned there. Starting with the first one, she wants to fulfill international obligations. So if you read it, it's at least better than what happens in the US, where current contracts are no longer being respected. The current contracts that the ministry has and the agreements the ministry has will be fulfilled, will be respected. She at least says there are some international obligations and rules that I remember, such as the connection of the ODA, the Official Development Assistance budget, to the GNP. As far as I remember, we once agreed that 0.7% of our budget at least would go to development assistance, but for whatever reason, that's not part of category 1, but who am I to judge? But other international obligations will be fulfilled. There will be a careful transfer, as it's being called by the minister. So projects that are being ended, focus areas that will be discontinued, countries where we will phase out. The transfer of activities, of knowledge, of all of that will happen in a very careful way. So the damage will be as little as possible. Let's formulate it as that, and that's at least the ambition of the minister. Clear exit strategies will be developed to do as less harm as needed. There will be a focus on cooperation with other countries. I mentioned this already in the topic of migration. But you can also expect it in topics such as security and in trade as well. So when there are opportunities for the Dutch to get something out of it on one of these 3 topics, more and more budget will go directly to other countries. So that can happen and will happen. Then on the working together with local and Dutch organizations, and maybe also good to explain here the role of international organizations as well. The minister speaks very highly of civil society organizations. You don't really see it back in the budget and the choices that he made, but in the letters he says that civil society organizations can play an important role in effective development assistance. So that is nice to read, and then especially in topics such as global health and trade and those types of topics, he really sees the advantage of civil society organizations in the policy. Apart from the budget, you will see a few changes. So less focus on international organizations and larger consortia, which used to be the old policy of the ministry. But more focus on local organizations and national organizations, Dutch NGOs as well. They still have the opportunity to apply for funding, but no longer in the form of larger consortia. We have to see how that works when the details are being published, but that's a bit how she sees it. You see point number 5 that is connected to point number 4, and that's the support for small-scale Dutch private initiatives. So the smaller CSO NGOs, Dutch NGOs, and the minister speaks very highly of them and sees the importance of their work, and also sees the passion of individuals that decide to do good in developing countries, and she is going to examine to what extent the Dutch government can support these types of organizations. How that is being organized, we have to see, but yeah, it seems that these types of organizations will get funding opportunities or support opportunities at least. Something we always see when new policies are being published is the topic of policy coherence. It's also mentioned here, the importance of policy coherence. And pretty much it means that ministries should work together, or at least should not do harm to each other. And that needs to be coordinated really well. And if there are negative effects, then the minister will do her best to minimize the negative effects. So yeah, this is being mentioned, as I mentioned, in pretty much all the policies. So let's see how that works in practice. Cooperation with international organizations has been mentioned in a few thematic areas where a few examples have been mentioned. Here she explains also that it means that some organizations will be funded outside of the focus areas of the ministry. So it can still be that some money will go to sectors that are no longer a priority or are in the budget are phasing out, but for other reasons, diplomatic reasons or financial reasons, or because there are already obligations made, still budget will go into these sectors. That can happen, but we have to see. Also here, a policy concretization needs to be developed, so we have to see what this actually will mean. The minister says on this, we will start by deciding what we want to achieve and then determine which organizations will be the best partner. Well, and that's something you would hope that was the starting point for all the decisions made earlier, that there was a vision behind it, but yeah, I'm afraid that was not so visible. As he mentioned it also in the debate with Parliament 3 weeks ago, that effectiveness of aid is not super important. It's more about efficiency and cutting budget. So, but with the UN organizations or international organizations, she has a slightly different approach. So, okay. There's also something in it for the Dutch business. As you might know, that organizations can get funding through tendering or contracts with UN, World Bank, those types of organizations. She mentioned that Dutch companies already get 550 million from tenders from the UN and 150 million from development banks, and that needs to go up. So we are still going to fund these types of organizations, but we also want to get more out of it. So that's the principle behind it. Last two things. International development as a leverage. So, as mentioned earlier, if in the case of water, for example, in the water management, and this was also mentioned, if the budget of the ministry can help to get resources mobilized from others, so it can be from investors or pension funds or maybe other donors, then that might be used. So for each million that the ministry invests somewhere, they hope to mobilize leverage more funding from others. So that with limited investment from the Dutch government, a lot of impact will be achieved. So strategically, this will be used. And last but not least, she will focus more on effect-based management. So this means that a lot will be measured as if it was not measured before, but goals are being set at the beginning of activities, of projects, of programs, and those will be evaluated. So if needed, things can be steered into a certain direction, and that. So what it means concretely, we have to see, but because I think this is already the most evaluated and measured sector there is, but that is definitely not going to change. So this is on the how that the ministry wants to work. Last thing before we go into the Q&A, what can you expect as next steps? In the spring, so now the new policy letter on the whole ministry has been published. In the spring, we don't know the exact date, but somewhere in the coming months, she will share her policy of how to collaborate with civil society organizations. So all the things that I've just mentioned where I said, well, that's not 100% certain yet. It can go this way or that way. We have to see. That will be made very concrete, hopefully in spring. And then the subsidy framework that I mentioned, the successor of the Power of Voices strategic partnership round, that will be published this summer. So that means that for all of you that are going to apply, well, it will be a busy summer ahead. Also here, no exact date has been mentioned yet, but new projects and programs should start in 26. So you can expect it early in the summer, 3 months writing period, 3 months evaluation period, or something like that. So let's see. Rick, I hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Han. All right, so that concludes our 45-minute session. Before we move to the Q&A, a few final points. We're sharing a list of alternative donors per thematic area affected by the ministry's changes. You will find it on our LinkedIn, so please share it in your own networks to help more organizations. If you wish to have a more tailored list for your organization specifically, please let us know and we can discuss what we can do for you. At the end of this webinar, you will receive a recording and a feedback survey. Your input is highly valuable and it helps shape future webinars. Yeah, we also see a lot of people joining from the US today. Our senior consultant, Kenneth van Tol, will be in DC in the beginning of March. So if you want to use that opportunity to meet up with her one-on-one, feel free to reach out to us. We can always try and set up a meeting. And lastly, do you have a specific donor or topic that you want covered as part of this series? Do let us know, because that's also very valuable and highly appreciated. Then our next webinar will be on March 11, and we will cover the European foundation market with Delphine Dolares. She's the CEO of Filea, which is a web network organization representing over 7,500 foundations across 30 plus countries. Don't miss it. And now we will close the recording and open the floor for Q&A, but through our